Let's create a custom type and bind a couple of UI elements to properties of that type. We will see how to use the source property on this example, and then you will get acquainted with the notion of a data context. Besides, this type will be the main building block for the further topics of data binding. Here I've created the custom type craftsman with properties name, last name, age and picture path. Let's look at XAML markup. We're going to display the information from an instance of the craftsman type through this image, 2 text blocks and 1 text box. Okay, now let's make this data to be displayed on the UI. At first, let's create the bindings in C#. I've created here an instance of a craftsman. Let's bind it. Let's bind the picture. We set the source to craftsman, and we have to set the path to the picture path. And then we set the binding. And we will do the same for the other properties. Let's reformat the code. Let's check if it works. Great, everything works. There is something I want to mention in addition. As you see, we explicitly set the source property. It references the instance of the craftsman type object. What will happen if we make the direct translation into XAML of this binding created in C#? Let's check what will happen. I'll remove one binding from the code behind and set it in XAML. Right here. And let's run the application. And this binding doesn't work. This is because the source property doesn't reference the instance of an object. It has been set by an unknown for WPF string craftsman. It doesn't know what it is. The binding can't find it. We don't have access in XAML to our object instance. If you want to use the source property in such a case, then you have to create an object like this. We create the instance of craftsman in the window resources, and now we can reference it through the static resource markup extension. And without rebuilding, now you can see that it works. Actually, we have here 2 other solutions. The first one is to set data context, and the second one is to set a relative source. Let's look how we can set the data context. We'll set the data context at the window level. Here you can see how to set data context using a relative source. Relative source self means pointing to itself, so the instance of this window becomes the data context for all Windows child elements. Now you can just set the path. Let's run the application. And it works. Another way is to set a relative source directly at the level of the UI element. Let's remove the data context from the window level and set it right here. and I'll use find ancestor with the ancestor type. We use a feature of searching for ancestors by a type. In this case, the binding searches for the root element. Let's check that everything works fine. Yeah, it works. But of course, there's a real mess in our code behind. We have to do something about that. The best way is to rely on a data context in this case. Let's get a little bit back and set the data context at the window level. Now let's get rid of explicit bindings in the C# code behind and implement them declaratively in XAML. Let's bind the picture. Let's bind the last name. And the age. Let's check if it works. Everything works fine. And the next thing we want to is to see what will happen if the value of a property, which is the source of a binding, changes in runtime. Will the UI change correspondingly? Will it display the updated value? Let's answer these questions.